Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Give me one moment. I'm going to drag you over to the panelist side.
Woohoo! Oh, fun. That's... I hope you appreciate.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Thank you for bringing the heels into the hats and heels.
I figured no one's going to be able to see them otherwise, so I had to get a little creative. Okay. It's been fun listening back to this.
Alrighty. Sorry, I'm just opening everything up.
That's okay. Your mum says hi.
So we'll be starting in probably another minute or so because we realized that the performance piece that we had just before this is like 30 minutes and 20 seconds long or something. So I was going to probably transition over just a little bit into the beginning of this. We're just going to give a few more minutes for people to sign on.
It's okay. It means I can have a cup of tea in the meantime, so.
All right. So for the sake of time, because this is a brief 30-minute session that we just want to, jump right in and get right into the topic. So first and foremost, thank you, woodwindFest, for having us. We really appreciate it. We are Hats and Heels, a bassoon and harp duo. We'll get a little bit more into who we are. But first, I want to just show you our topic. So we're jumping into my shared screen here. Here we go. Alrighty. So we are going to be discussing today how to commission building authentic relationships with composers, because this is something that we are both passionate about and have a little bit of experience in. So who are we? My name is Dr. Blaire Koerner. I am the bassoon, and as you probably noticed, the hats of Hats and Heels. And then I am joined by my colleague.
Hello, my name is Dr. Rosanne Moore. I am the multi-strung portion of Hats and Heels, and as you can see, also the heeled version. I've this is the problem with sat-down panels. I had to put my shoes on my harp so people could actually see them.
So we met at the Eastman School of Music. We both received our doctorates there and have developed this group, which specifically focuses on this concept of storytelling. We really appreciate engaging with our audiences and building pieces and interdisciplinary works of art into our repertoire and our recitals so that we can really challenge individuals to think about different themes, topics, social concepts, etc. So our focus is to bring in as many interdisciplinary aspects as possible. And to do that, we commission quite a bit, both composers as well as artists as well. So I am personally, in addition to being a bassoonist and a freelancer in New York State, I teach at the Koerner School of Music at Syracuse University, and I am also a career advisor at the Eastman School of Music. Rosie?
And as well as being a harpist, I am also a professor. I am the new harp instructor at the University of Oregon. So I just moved out to the West Coast and I freelance all over the place. And also I am an actress and a voiceover artist, because why not do something else?
So one particular project that we worked on, Rosie will introduce, really focuses on this commissioning concept.
Absolutely. So Actually, before the pandemic hit, me and Blaire were talking about putting together a faculty recital for us both to perform at Eastman. And we decided to focus on the signing of the 19th Amendment and the 100th year of women being allowed to vote, or some women being allowed to vote. From there, we started to spiral into what is the whole idea of being a woman in general, and we decided to use that as a theme. So our title of our program is Women Are, and then you fill in a blank afterwards. So each of the pieces and artists we worked with had a different adjective afterwards. So women are strong, women are curious, women are complicated, etc., etc. And our aim was to help build this program by not only lifting up women but also making sure that we were highlighting female composers who were writing for us.
So a little bit of what we're going to be discussing today. So we basically broke this up into 3 sections. So when we're talking about this concept of commissioning, we wanted to reference these collaborative mindset that we think is really, really appropriate and important to establish before jumping into a project. The second thing is setting particular expectations. So all the logistics that we need to think about when we're commissioning and how to approach those. And then problem solving. At the end, we have some interesting scenarios that we've personally experienced, sometimes together as a group and sometimes individually, that we would like to pose for you to think about, because this might be appropriate for you to address now in anticipation of what might come down the road should you be interested in commissioning. So, collaborative mindset, the very first thing we would like to establish is that this is not a transactional relationship. This is an actual collaborative relationship. As you are performers, reaching out and building this relationship with composers or an artist or a dancer, if you're going to be doing interdisciplinary as well, you want to establish that this is a partnership or a group work, and that there's going to be some give and take within that. So the first thing to understand is you need to know the right fit. So you need to know what you want to get out of this project. So when you're thinking about it, rather than it's very easy to just go up to a composer friend at a school and say, hey, could you write me something? And although that might be a great thing just to see if they're interested, particularly if you have interesting instrumentation like ourselves, you do need to provide a little bit more context, and you do need to understand what you want to get out of this to begin with. So what is this for? What's this project about? And you also want to do your research on the composer themselves, because what you might find out is that certain composers would be very appropriate for certain projects, but maybe not so much in other situations. Perhaps it's a style thing. Perhaps, as we're interdisciplinary, we like to throw in words and theatrics into our pieces. And not all composers are willing or wanting to do that with us. That may not fit their own style. So you have to understand that, it's okay. They might still be your friends. They might still be a colleague, but not every pairing of performers and composers is going to be an absolute fit, and that just having that conversation right off the bat to see if it's going to work rather than just assuming it's going to work is a great place to start.
Absolutely. So how do you even build this relationship? Well, starting out, you need to communicate with your composers and go and make friends with them to some extent. I certainly talk about being a professional composer collector. I will pester every single composer that I meet until they write me something. But also, how are you going to get them to be involved in the project in the first place? Hopefully there's money involved, especially if you're working on a professional level, but perhaps if you're students still, you're just finding a collaborative element where you can perform on their recital and they can write something for your recital. An important thing is to think about your theme and brief as well. So as we've already discussed, we are definitely a group that loves storytelling, and we love bringing in all these interdisciplinary elements into our work. So what is the theme? Whether it's women's struggles, whether it's storytelling, whether it's fairy tales, anything like that, you have to give to your composer at the very onset of when you start having this conversation, and see if this is something that they vibe off of. Now, they may come up with an idea all on their own, and that's great. Or they may need a little more of a conversation with you to work out what is going to work for their creative minds as well as yours going forward.
And with that, I would like to also mention, I forgot to add at the intro that if you have questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little icon. Right now, it's hard for us to see the chat, so we will answer all the questions at the end. We have to hopefully save time for all of your questions. So feel free to add them right now so you don't forget. And with that, listening and learning, right? So when it's a collaborative relationship, just like anything else, we need to listen to our friends, our family members, anyone that we have a relationship, and then also provide back our own comments and feedback. So when it comes to creating a piece, this falls into this world of constructive criticism or feedback. So when you receive a piece and you are starting to work on it and you have some things or concerns, whether it's a part that's out of your playing ability, or it's, there's some interesting articulations that you haven't quite seen before, it's okay to provide this feedback and go, you know what, this is not very idiomatic for my instrument. It is not going to sit 100% well. I like to use percentages. Like if you give me a really, really high note, I'm going to say it's going to come out like 75% accurate. So like, do you really want it to be that beautiful? Or are you okay with whatever pops out, right? And some composers are pretty flexible. And that's why asking clarifying questions is going to be really, really important. So it could have just been Sibelius or Finale, a editing software, added in a weird notation or a accent or a word, and then they can go, oh, that wasn't me, sorry, and they'll clear that up. So asking questions, providing feedback, telling them a little bit more about your instrument, and when you ask for this feedback, it goes both ways. So when you play something, you can give them different opportunities to hear it. So like, here's 4 different ways I could play what I see. Which one do you want? And then they can hear your, give you feedback and say, I like an option number 2, but could you do it like a little bit more this way? And that give and take, because it is a collaborative process. They are the creators, but you will be the performer.
So part of having these clarifying questions is checking in with your composers. Now, this does vary from composer to composer. We have both worked with people who will message us multiple times during the process saying, oh, here's an update, here's an update, here's an update. Can we check this? Does this work? And then you will have composers who you don't hear anything for months and you suddenly just get a piece at the end of it and you hope that it's going to work. And again, talking about clarifying questions, you have to compromise what the vision is that the composer is having, because they are an artist as well. This is their authorship, their artwork. Are you going to be able to do what is in their head? And just sort of compromising vision with possibility. So from my personal experience, I know a lot of composers think just because the harp music kind of looks like piano music written down, that you can just write as though it's a piano. You really can't, because we have 7 pedals and we don't use our little fingers. Just for an example, so if there is a 10-note chord, that is not something that I can physically play all in one go. For me, I like to give composers a lesson with the instrument. Obviously, it's a bit difficult in COVID times. And then I sit them down behind the instrument after the fact as well, just to sort of show them the physicalities of what works and what doesn't.
All right. So you have, thought of the project, you've anticipated that, what you want to get out of this, the style, the length, and so forth. Now it's about setting all the expectations, right? So the first thing that you're going to be doing is an initial invitation. So even if you've met someone in the hallway and say, hey, would you be interested? And they said yes. And even if you had a coffee with them and provide in detail the project and what you want to get out of it, please, 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 please always follow up with a written invitation by an email or something. It's very simple, but it basically puts it down in words so that everyone has a place to come back to in case, the coffee shop was loud or they forget something and they have a bajillion things on their mind. So a few things that are very important, to answer when you're writing this is, how would you describe the project? So again, what's this for? What's the end goal? Is this a recital? Is this going to be a recording? Do you hope to get this published? Is this a part of a larger conference, or is this just something that you're doing on the side? Is this, a part of a larger collection of other people's works? And then they maybe can go and talk to other composers to see what they're doing. Time frame. really important. As you're
Super
inviting them,
important.
you want to make sure that they have time for this. So if you know it's a 6 months out is a performance, great. But then also saying, the performance is 6 months out, I'm hoping I get it in 4.5 months from now. So that is their time frame from working, and they have to put that in their schedule, and they have to go double check to make sure that is something that they can do. And then, of course, how are you paying the composer? Rosie mentioned this earlier. As a student to student, it's a little bit more complimentary and available to you to like ask a friend to write something, because they could use it in a class, they could use it in a lesson, they could help it use it as a portfolio, and maybe even bring it over and you can play on their recital. But as you start potentially going to the professional world, or if you're someone hiring a student outside of an organization, then you're going to want to pay them. And so you have to articulate that in the initial email. Are they going to get paid? And is that, sometimes it could be financial, and sometimes it's hey, I'll give you a great lunch and coffee afterwards. But you have to determine that and expect that they may come back and say, no, that won't work for me, and give you an alternative. And that's okay. But you should mention from the start whether or not this is going to be a thing that they're doing voluntary, or if you're hoping to give them something in return.
Absolutely. Because again, everyone needs to pay their rent. Everyone needs to pay for their coffee dates as well. So once you've got this initial invitation and once everyone is on board, you do have to write a contract. Now, contracts sound like a big scary word, but it just makes sure that everything is in a document in the right place for both of you to go back to. And if there are any discrepancies, it should be in the contract. So most important things you need to have on there: dates. Firstly, when did you ask the composer? Secondly, when are they getting paid? Are they getting paid in installments? When is the performance or project going to be? And most importantly, when do they have to get music to you? Because as Blaire was saying before, a project may be 6 months out, but you need to make sure they are not giving you this music the night before and you find that it's impossible and you can't do it. So you need to make sure you are fettering those expectations and making sure it's all in writing. Again, description of the work. So if this is for a particular project and you say you want it to be based on a piece of literature, for example, or you want them to collaborate with an artist, you need to make sure they have that information, as that is going to affect how they write. Back to dates, payment timeline. Now, I always suggest that if you are able to, that you do pay a deposit of some script to your composer. Again, they need to eat as well as you. They may say they don't, but they really do. And you need to make sure that you're telling them when they're going to be paid. Now, maybe you are applying for a grant. Perhaps that grant falls through. Do you have a safety net for that? An example for this is a couple of colleagues of mine in a harp duo commissioned someone to write a piece, and it was a good friend of theirs. They didn't get the grant that the three of them applied for, so instead they came up with another payment plan and made sure that that was written down. What are the performance or recording agreements? So you get to do the first performance. You've paid for this commission, but do you get to record it as well? Do you get exclusivity on that? Exclusivity clauses are really interesting when you are talking about new music, because you have paid the upfront amount for this composer to write for you. Are you going to say that you are the only person who is allowed to play it for a certain amount of time? And also, after that first performance, where does the ownership lie? Do future performers have to say that you were the person who commissioned the piece, for example? And then the most important thing, which we have learned from previous experiences writing contracts, make sure the contact details for all parties are on there. And that means their address, their phone number, and their email address. Not everyone has PayPal or Venmo. Some people really do like to be paid by check or by a bank transfer. So you need to make sure that you have all that information to save lots of backwards and forwards from email and phone calls.
So even though a contract seems big and scary, it's just basically getting all the pertinent information in one document so that everyone knows where to go to should they have a question, or should they, want to follow up with something, or, and honestly, it's actually helping to protect your relationships, because if there's any questions or challenges or confusions, we all have something to go back to, and then there's ownership over that process because it's all there and there isn't any confusion and potential pointing of fingers or something along those lines. So this is really going to help continue to build a strong relationship, and trust me, they appreciate this too, because it means that they and their work are protected. Okay, so now the scenario part, which is going to be interesting. We have each experienced some of these, so we're going to pose a few questions. We don't necessarily have all the answers. We will give you some of the solutions that we came up with, or some tips around how to be professional and respectful around this, but we have a few. So the first one is cold calling. We always have two, one from a performer's perspective and one from a composer's perspective. So the first one is, how do you build a relationship with a composer whom you have no connection to? So we always recommend, in order to do that authentic relationship building, is to start with the people that you do know. So whether they're a friend of yours or a friend of a friend, or finding some sort of commonality between you, is a great place to start, because it gives you something to talk about. The response time might be quicker. You might have some connections or ideas that might be similar. So that would be the first place to go, because just like anything else, if you cold call someone, ask for an interview, ask for a job, ask for an internship, the chances of them responding back if they have no connection to you are a little bit slimmer. Can you still reach out to this individual? Absolutely, 100%. So if you admire a composer and you really would like to, great. If you find that they're a good fit for what you do, wonderful. But you're going to want to make sure that you connect with them somehow. So if that's the case, reference something of theirs that you like, attend a presentation of theirs, or see what they have to offer educationally, and make a connection there first before then reaching out to them on a cold call. So there's different ways of connecting on different levels, and also realizing that some of these individuals don't necessarily have email access. So then you have to go for a form, or you might not be able to connect them on a person-to-person outside of social media way. And that's where you tap into the educational opportunities that they have and see if they're going to be presenting on something, and then find your way in. But try to start with the people that you do know or connections that you have, because the chances of you getting a relationship out of that are stronger.
Absolutely. On the other side of that, I know that I have experienced this just in the past week, but what if a composer just turns up in your email inbox, or even comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, I have a piece, will you play it?" That's really great. I love it when composers contact me and do this, but we don't always have the time to learn all this repertoire. Also, what if they're just sending you a cold call saying, "Please buy my music"? That can be a really difficult thing to navigate. If the score is $50, $60, which some of these pieces may be, you don't know what this piece sounds like yet unless they have included a recording. And again, much as these composers do need to eat, you need to have some kind of idea as to whether this is a piece that you can use on any programs or not. So what I tend to do is send an email back saying, "Thank you very much for the invite to play your piece," and see if they can help set up a performance of it. That means there is a little more give and take between you two, and it's not just one side doing all of the work.
Again, non-transactional and more of building that relationship and collaborative aspect. Dropping the ball, real deal here. All right, so how do you handle a conversation with a composer who missed their deadline or isn't very communicative? So as Rosie mentioned, they may just kind of do their thing and then not respond to emails. This is something that we would recommend you put into a contract. So, in the deadline section underneath it, you can mention, okay, when are the outs, so to speak. So if something happens, like, I don't know, a pandemic, do they have more time on this, or if they miss the deadline, are you guaranteed to perform it on that recital, right? So if the deadline is 3 weeks before the recital, if you get anything later than that, then the chances of you being able to do it well might be slim. So is there something in that contract that says, if you don't get to the deadline, I can't guarantee a performance within the next year, or we'll try again in 8 months, or whatever is reasonable to you. But that's a legitimate concern. And then the communication thing too, within that, you might ask that you get a midpoint piece halfway through just to see how the style is. And if they don't respond after a few emails, you might be able to say, I haven't heard from you. I'm not sure if you're still a part of this project. And if that's the case, if I don't hear from you in another little bit, I'm going to have to pull out from this project. Unfortunately, that might mean that you lose a deposit, but then there isn't an issue in the long run. But that's something, again, you can put in the contract and just say, please respond. I would like to continue working, and I need to have some feedback, understanding that, you know, maybe something happened personally and they just got overwhelmed and they might get back to you. Great. But having something in the contract is something to lean on. And then you can navigate that conversation.
Absolutely. So talking about this, what if you have set your deadline way too close to when you're supposed to be performing, or say the New York Philharmonic decides to call you up 2 weeks before and say you have to go perform with them and you just don't spend enough time on this piece? Or just, we're performers, we're humans. What if you just don't have a good day on stage? Your string snaps, your reeds decide not to work. Any of them. I'm trying to think of woodwinds.
Yes, that's accurate.
What do you do? I've certainly been in this situation where a colleague of mine wrote me a percussion and harp piece for one of my other chamber groups, and we just had a bad day. One of us looked at the wrong line of music and we couldn't get back on. The audience didn't know, but it's not a recording that I would ever be comfortable with someone hearing. So how did we deal with that? We have promised that particular composer that the next time we meet up, we will do a proper recording of it, and he will then have that forevermore. So that is one way around it, is to make sure that you promise that find a way that you can record or perform this piece going forward.
Right, because the contract is for you too, right? So like if part of this, you said that they were going to get a great recording out of this for the portfolio, or be able to apply for a grant or a graduate school or something along those lines, and you drop the ball, you need to make that up to them. Just as if they miss a deadline, you know, that's their problem as well. So like, give and takes. This is for both of you. And then, of course, not the good fit. So what if you receive the piece and it's not exactly what you're looking for? So perhaps there's a lot more extended techniques than you're interested in, or the length was triple the length at what you expected. Again, this is where the project description is really important. So what is the length that you're hoping for? Can you provide some stylistic examples that you're hoping for as well? Would you be okay adding on extended techniques, or, you know, doing weird things with my reed, or putting things inside the harp, which I know some people are okay with and some are not. And that's the clarity, right? And so if it's clear in the contract of what you were hoping for, and it's, you know, right there, and it still doesn't fit, then that's a conversation you might need to have. And if it's not clear, then that's something you'll learn to fix in the future. And then you have a piece and you have to continue moving forward with it. So make sure everything that you were hoping for, and going back and forth, having constant communication, hearing samples throughout, will hopefully give them enough time to make some tweaks, and maybe some compromise can be made.
From the other side of this, you get this piece and it's not badly written, it's not idiomatic, but it just isn't something that you can play. Whether you are a student and you just don't have that physicality for particular techniques in there, or whether it's just a case of you just didn't spend enough time on it. Again, going back to the dropping the ball thing, how are you going to deal with this? So I haven't been in the situation of having a piece that's been beyond me, but I have been brought in as someone last minute to cover a piece that unfortunately a harpist wasn't able to do. Again, this could be because it's beyond you. It could be because you break your arm the day of the performance and someone needs to come in. But you need to assure that composer that they are still going to get their piece played. So whether you just suck it up and work 24 hours before the performance, or whether you pay to bring in another professional, is up to you. And again, if you are a student, you can promise a nice fancy dinner to a friend of yours if they're helping you out. But that is something of making sure, again, that you are collaborating with your colleagues and your colleagues you work with now are going to be the people you're going to be working with for the next 50 years. There's no need to make enemies in this world. So whatever happens, even if you realize something's not a good fit, make sure that you find a way of making it work so that these people are colleagues that you can rely on for the next few decades.
It's all about being professional and respectful. All right, so we just talked a lot at you. So, and I think I saw some hand raising little buttons. So I'm going to open it up for some questions. So I'm going to stop the share so you don't just stare at a screen. And we will look into the Q&A box to see if anyone had any questions, or you can feel free to raise your hand now. There's at the bottom, if you wave your mouse around your screen, you'll see a bunch of little buttons at the bottom. There'll be a Q&A, or I think there's a raise your hand option as well. So I'm just pulling that up.
And if not, we'll just sit back and chat for another few minutes.
Are there examples of contracts available? Great question, Rosie. Could you talk about how you developed your contract?
Yes, absolutely. So the way I developed the contract for Hats and Heels was actually through a lot of contracts that I have done with other composers. But I did just do a brief Google search. Google is your best friend. And I just looked up, it was actually a UK Musicians Union contract, and I just tweaked it for what we needed for our purposes. There were a couple of things on there to do with British law, to do with copyright, which I realized I had to take out. But that was something that was definitely useful so that we had a template to work off.
And of course, you can always then take that edited version and bring it to a professor or bring it to a colleague and see if there's anyone, if they have any comments that they would like to say, oh, you might want to add this or tweak this. And of course, bring it to your composer friends too. If you were to sign this, what information would you want from here? And that I'm not asking yet, and that's a great way to do it too. So I realize that this is an editable document that you can tweak until of course it's signed, and then it is no longer editable.
Yes, absolutely. And making sure you have that backwards and forwards in case something gets missed off. You ask for you accidentally misprint that you want to have a 1-minute piece and you actually want a 10-minute piece. That's quite an issue. So you want to make sure that that is something that is taken care of. So next question.
Yep. How do you determine appropriate payment amounts? Ooh, great question for professionals, not students. Is there a rule of thumb or where their fees are notated? Great question. So how much an individual artist is worth is something that artists struggle a lot with.
We're really bad at talking about money. Just as artists, we're very, oh yes, everything's so wonderful. We do it for the art. But again, we need to pay our rent.
Right.
So it is a conversation that we are all learning to be better at.
So great question. So this is one of those things where you can ask the composer. Some of them have set fees, and that might be for a length of piece, that may be for amount of time, that may be for the amount of instrumentation. And so you can ask and say, this is what I'm hoping for. What do you think about that? And they may go, actually, because I'll give you the friends and family rate, and they'll give you a slightly smaller discount. That happens. So that's a great way to start. You can also talk to unions. Because depending on the area, obviously, if you're living in New York, you're asking composer in New York, the rates are probably going to be higher than if you're going somewhere in the middle of the country in a suburban area. So that impacts rates as well. So checking with unions are a great place to start, because to be honest, it will vary from composer to composer. And if you have a grant that's supporting, or if you're getting some funding, you might start with, I have this much money, will that cover it? And then if not, then you have to figure out how to fulfill the rest of it.
Absolutely. And a way of working around that is working in a consortium, which is bringing in lots of professionals or lots of similar-minded musicians together. That can be a way of raising money. And also, some of these composers will have their own agents, and their agents will negotiate on their behalf. So that's also something to be aware of.
So the next one is about exclusivity. So we mentioned that a little bit. So if you commission a piece and you've got exclusivity, what does that mean? So this is something Rosie taught me. So I'm going to let her speak on this one because I actually learned this from her.
Okay, so exclusivity for a piece. You are paying the X amount of money to, or actually, maybe you're not. Maybe you're just writing for a friend, but you are the person who is part of the reason why a piece is being created. So because of that, you can claim that you are the only person allowed to perform that piece for 6 months, a year, 2 years. Honestly, anything longer than the year, I think, is a little bit much. With recording, you do have to have that discussion as well with the composer, and that's something that should come out of your initial conversation and then the contract. With publishing, that normally should go through the composer because it's their music. Some composers may give you a cut of the proceeds if any of the published parts sell, especially if you have donated your fingerings, your pedalings, anything like that to them, because you have been an editor on the score. These arrangements can be flexible. So if there is a piece that you are desperate to play for a senior recital, for example, because it's perfect, it fits your theme, but it was only written 9 months ago and premiered, you can reach out to the composer and the performer and say, hi, is there any way I can play this piece? Whether you pay a little bit extra or whether it's just a case of you have to state that this particular individual commissioned this piece and these grants paid for it.
Right. So one last question, because I know we're a little bit over time and I want to just kind of round this off. And that is, where do you find composers and who can you tap for insights? As we mentioned before, starting with your connections. So if you don't personally have composers that you can think off the top of your head, talk to your teachers, talk to your colleagues, talk to other faculty members, look at local universities and look at the composers on faculty there. Trust me, they're still, even though they're teachers, they're still actively writing. So that's a great place to start. And then you can ask them in like who their connections are. And then from there, you know, think about all the places that you hear your music. So if you're a particular instrument, violin, cello, woodwind player, harp, piano, and you're online and you're looking for pieces, where do you go to finding pieces? Personally, I like to check out libraries because, you know, like Sibling Music Library has an enormous amount of pieces in repertoire. So I can search by if I want to be with a harp, or if I just want to be by myself, or if I want to be with electronic tape. And I find so many new composers that way. And then I can go find them on websites and find them on social media and follow them and figure out if they're someone I might want to work with in the future. Understanding that, of course, that might be a cold call at that point. But that's a great way to find new pieces and new individuals. Rosie?
Absolutely. And part of this is actually just being social. So
yeah, I do the whole, like, I research online and she does the whole social thing. So that's her. And I'm more like the research girl.
I am definitely that person who will go up to a composer and go, hi, have you written for harp? Write me a piece. And that can be that first initial connection. You can do this through music courses. You can do this whether you're a high school student, university student, professional. Just starting up those conversations. Maybe if you're in an orchestra and there's a new commission and the composer comes along, you might get to have a conversation with them about the part they've written you, and that can start a conversation from there. Social media is also a really powerful tool, especially things like Twitter and Instagram, because following what these composers do, especially as they're putting out some of their music, and again with performers, following performers and seeing what that hashtag new music will bring up. When you click on that, you may be able to find a lot of interesting things.
So that is all we have for today. Thank you very, very much for joining us and learning a little bit about it. It's just like scraping the surface, but we just want to give you a little bit of a taste that you know what to anticipate should this be something of interest. Again, my name is Dr. Blaire Koerner, and that is Dr. Rosanne Moore. And should you want to connect with us, feel free to come and Google Hats and Heels, duo. I showed my my website at the very beginning, so you can find us there. You can reach out to us and contact if you have further questions or would like to connect with us in any way. Rosie, you have any other final comments?
Yeah, just find us on Instagram. We probably will have a Facebook page at some point. That's my job. So, but yeah, find us on Instagram and feel free to send us any further questions that you might have. And thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon or this evening. It's afternoon with me. I'm still on the West Coast. So,
all right. Thank you very much and we'll see you soon.
Bye.